In this video, I want to talk about some other aspects of conditional statements that regard the English language. So I've already said that when we're talking about conditional statements, they basically have this form. We've got A arrow B. I can stick other letters in there as well. I could say P arrow Q or what have you. And of course, they can be more sophisticated. These are variables that can stand in for more complex things. It's just a pretty basic way of looking at it. Now, I've said that the left side of the arrow is also called the antecedent, and the right side is also called the consequent. So antecedent, literally the thing that seeds before; consequent, literally the thing that is the sequence, with sequence. So it comes afterwards. Well, there are some other names for these aspects that I want to introduce that can kind of pass you by. So another word, or another phrase I should say, for antecedent is this: sufficient condition. And another word for a consequent is a necessary condition. And that's because the right side of the arrow is the part that must happen. If the thing on the left happens, the right side must happen. It's necessary. This is the sufficient aspect. This is the necessary aspect. Now, sometimes we can put this, and you'll especially see this in legal language, in terms and agreements, in terms and conditions, the kinds of documents that we kind of just skip over and go, "Good, I agree." But here's what they mean. Or when you see this, here's what it means. I'll say this statement right here, this formal proposition, A arrow B, it could be in English written this way. The way that we've talked about so far is if A, then B. How would I write that? A arrow B. But what if I said A is a sufficient, I'm going to abbreviate here, sufficient condition for B? How would I write that? Exactly the same way. Why? It says A is a sufficient condition. Well, what are sufficient conditions? The part basically is another word for antecedent, and saying A is the left side of an arrow relative to B, is what I mean when I say that something is a sufficient condition. If I said also B is a necessary condition for A, how would that be written? Precisely the same way. When you say that something is a necessary condition, you're saying this is the part that goes on the right side of an arrow. So in this case, B is a necessary condition. It's telling you B is on the right side of an arrow for A. That means relative to A. So it means B is going on the right side, but whatever's left here goes on the left side. Conversely, when something is, again, a sufficient condition, A is a sufficient condition for B. It's saying this thing goes on the left side, what goes on the right? Whatever's left. Whatever's remaining, I should say there in this case. They always be written the same way. Then we get to, in English, this peculiar phrase: only if. Now, I've said before, whatever follows I said peculiarly, and here's why. Whatever follows the phrase if goes on the left side of an arrow. So you might be thinking, okay, whatever follows only if goes on the left side of an arrow. Nope. Only if, or whatever follows the phrase only if, designates a necessary condition. So strangely enough, whatever follows only if goes on the right side of an arrow. Now, this is really easy to screw up. That means if I said something like A only if B, your gut reaction might be, hey, there's if, whatever follows if goes on the left side of the arrow, this needs to be B arrow A. How should it actually be written? A only if B? Exactly like that. Because whatever follows only if actually goes on the right side of an arrow. So here's the way to not screw this up, because I've taught logic for years and I say this over and over again. Don't screw this up, don't screw this up, don't screw this up. Here's how not to screw this up. Whenever you see only if, just go ahead and write an arrow right over it. Whenever you see that, because you'll start to overthink it. You look at it and go, only if. That's kind of the same thing as if. Well, stop it. Whenever you see only if, just draw an arrow right over it. There's no way you can screw this up if you do that. So that's my recommendation for what to do with only if. It's a necessary condition designator. But don't overthink about it, simply draw that right over it. Now what that means is, when we're talking about only if and we're using it in English, that we're saying whatever follows it follows with necessity. So what that means is something like this. If I say, you know, I'll go to the party, and we'll say, me going to the party, I'm going to make P. I'll go to the party only if you go. So there we've got our connective languages right there. If I say something like this, I'll go to the party only if you go. I am not actually saying, if you go, then I will go to the party. It kind of sounds like that what should be going on there. That is not what is being said. What is being said is this. If I say, I'll go to the party only if you go, and we can even kind of do that in kind of an innocuous voice. I'll go to the party only if you go. But what's actually what's being said here is this. I told you this would be draw an arrow right over it, and this in this case would be P arrow Y. So what I'm actually saying when I say something like this is, if I'm going to the party, you're going. By necessity, you must go. If I'm going, you must go. It's not saying, if you go, that would be this. If you go, then I'll go to the party. If you use only if here, that is not what that means. It means this, not this. And these two things are not equivalent. They do not mean the same thing. They're actually, well, I don't want to say they're not precisely inverted because that would involve negations as well, but where there's a conflation of sufficiency and necessity there. So this phrase, only if you overthink it, will get very confusing. And you're probably most familiar with it in seeing it in the bigger phrase, if and only if. That means the arrow. Both sides are sufficient and necessary for each other. We'll get to that a little bit later when I start talking about biconditionals. My advice here is when you see only if, just draw an arrow right through it. Don't overthink it. Okay? Both for the quizzes, even stuff in your textbook as well. And listen out for when people say it or when you use it. Is that what you actually mean by it? Or have you mixed it up with just your regular old plain if? Okay. Next video, conditional proof.